I stood barefoot on the cold bathroom tile at 3 in the morning, my wedding ring pressed so hard into my palm that it left a crescent-shaped mark. My phone vibrated against the sink, lighting up the darkness with a name that was not my husband's. My chest felt like it was caving in, my breath shallow and panicked, because in that moment I knew one truth with terrifying clarity. I was seconds away from destroying the life I had built, yet part of me felt more alive than I had in years. Love was pulling me in two directions, and I was losing the strength to choose the right one. Before we go any further, thank you to every single person who has subscribed to this channel and continues to support these stories. And to all the new and returning viewers who are not yet subscribed, thank you for being here. I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button, because your support is the fuel and energy that keeps this channel alive and growing. Please remember to like, comment, and share your thoughts in the comments as you listen. Your voices matter, and I read them all. My name is Claire Whitman, and this is the story of how I almost gave up forever, not because I stopped believing in love, but because I stopped believing that love still wanted me. I was 36 years old, married for 11 years, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the Midwest of the United States. The kind of place where lawns were trimmed every Saturday morning, neighbors waved politely, and everyone assumed your life was as peaceful as it looked from the outside. I had a good job as a project coordinator at a regional marketing firm. I had a comfortable home with white siding and blue shutters. I had a husband who was dependable, loyal, and deeply respected by everyone who knew him. His name was Daniel. Daniel was the kind of man people trusted immediately. Calm voice, steady eyes, broad shoulders that made you feel protected just standing near him. He never forgot to pay bills, never missed a birthday, never raised his voice. He loved me in ways that were consistent and safe, and for a long time, that was enough. Or at least I convinced myself that it was. Somewhere along the way, our marriage became quiet in a way that was not peaceful. The laughter softened first. Then the long talks disappeared. We still shared a bed, but sleep came easier than intimacy. Our evenings turned into parallel routines, him on the couch with the news playing low, me scrolling on my phone, both of us pretending that this was what contentment looked like. I told myself that every marriage settled into this rhythm. I told myself that wanting more made me ungrateful. I told myself that love was supposed to feel calm, not electric. But calm slowly began to feel invisible. The loneliness did not arrive all at once. It seeped in through ordinary moments. Daniel asking about my day without really listening to the answer. Me dressing up for dinner and watching his eyes barely lift from his plate. The silence that followed intimacy, when I realized I felt more alone afterward than before. I started going to the gym more often, telling myself it was about health, about clearing my head. In truth, it was one of the few places I felt seen. Mirrors everywhere. Music pulsing. Bodies moving with intention. It reminded me that I still existed beyond being a wife. That was where I met Evan. Evan was not dramatic or flashy. He was familiar in a way that felt disarming. Mid-40s. A few strands of gray at his temples. A quiet confidence that came from someone who had lived a little and survived it. He went to the gym around the same time I did, early evenings after work. We nodded at each other at first, then exchanged polite smiles, then casual comments about the weather or the crowded weight room. The dangerous part was how easy it felt. He noticed small things. A new pair of running shoes. A change in my routine. The way my mood shifted depending on the day. When he asked how I was doing, he waited for the answer. That alone felt intoxicating. I never set out to betray my marriage. I did not wake up one morning and decide to become unfaithful. What I did instead was allow myself to enjoy the attention. I let the conversations stretch longer. I laughed more freely. I shared frustrations I should have brought home. At night, lying next to Daniel, I found my mind wandering to those moments. The sound of Evan's voice. The way his eyes softened when he looked at me. I hated myself for it, even as I craved it. Guilt became my constant companion. It sat heavy in my chest, whispering warnings I pretended not to hear. I compensated by being extra attentive at home, cooking Daniel's favorite meals, initiating affection, trying to quiet the growing ache inside me. But desire does not disappear just because you ignore it. The first real boundary fell on a Thursday. I had stayed late at work, exhausted and emotionally drained. When I arrived at the gym, my patience was thin, my defenses already worn down. Evan was there, stretching near the wall, and when our eyes met, something unspoken passed between us. He asked how my day had been. I answered honestly. Too honestly. We sat on the bench near the lockers afterward, the air thick with heat and sweat, the world around us fading into background noise. I shared things I had not said out loud in years. How lonely marriage could feel even when you were not alone. How frightening it was to miss the version of yourself you used to be. He listened without interrupting, without fixing, without judgment. When he told me that he understood, that he had once felt the same way in his own marriage before it ended, my heart clenched. Not in pity, in recognition.
Nothing physical happened that night.
No touch.
No kiss.
Just a look that lingered too long. Just the knowledge that something had shifted and that there was no pretending otherwise. On the drive home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. I replayed the evening over and over, trying to find a version of it that was harmless. There was none. I knew I had stepped onto a path that only led one place. Daniel was already asleep when I slipped into bed. I watched his chest rise and fall, steady and trusting, and tears burned behind my eyes. I wanted to wake him and confess everything. I wanted him to hold me and tell me that I was still chosen. Instead, I turned away and stared into the darkness, wondering when love had stopped feeling safe and how I had become capable of risking it all just to feel alive again. That night was the beginning, not of an affair, but of a war inside me. A battle between the woman I had been for years and the woman who was desperate to be seen, touched, and remembered. And I was already losing ground. After that Thursday, my life divided itself into before and after. Nothing on the surface changed, yet everything inside me shifted. I moved through my days like someone carrying a fragile secret pressed against her ribs. At work, I smiled and answered emails. At home, I cooked dinner and asked Daniel about his meetings. At night, I lay beside him listening to his breathing, wondering how a marriage could feel so solid and so distant at the same time. I told myself that what happened at the gym had been emotional weakness, nothing more. I promised myself distance. I altered my routine, arriving earlier some days, later on others. I tried to starve the feeling until it disappeared. Instead, it grew sharper. Evan did not chase me. That was part of what made him dangerous. When we crossed paths, he kept his tone light and respectful. He did not press. He did not demand. He simply remained present. Each time we spoke, he reflected something back to me that I had not seen in years. He made me feel articulate, desired,
Real.
The intimacy came before the touch. It arrived through long looks, shared silences, and the way our conversations drifted toward the edges of what was appropriate without crossing them. I began to dress differently, without admitting why. I began to arrive at the gym with a flutter in my chest that felt both thrilling and shameful. At home, Daniel sensed something, though neither of us named it. He became quieter, more careful. He asked if I was tired, if work was stressful, if I needed anything. His concern only deepened my guilt. Every kindness felt like another reason I did not deserve forgiveness. The night everything collapsed started as nothing special. Daniel had an overnight work trip. We kissed goodbye in the kitchen, his hand resting at my waist in a familiar, absent way. When the door closed behind him, the house felt cavernous. Too quiet. Too honest. I went to the gym that evening, telling myself it was routine. The parking lot was half empty. The air inside smelled of rubber mats and clean sweat. Evan was there, leaning against the counter near the water fountain. When our eyes met, the tension I had been denying snapped into focus. We talked after our workouts, standing too close, the space between us charged. He spoke about his divorce in broad strokes, about loneliness and mistakes, about learning too late what mattered. I listened, my heart pounding, recognizing pieces of myself in his story. When he suggested grabbing a drink nearby, I hesitated long enough to feel the weight of the decision. Then I nodded. The bar was quiet, dimly lit, tucked into a strip mall a few miles away. We sat at the far end, our knees almost touching. The conversation flowed easily, slipping from safe topics into deeper territory. I shared my fears, my doubts, the ache of feeling unseen in my own life. He responded with empathy that felt intimate without being invasive. Each word pulled me further from the woman I believed myself to be. When his hand brushed mine, it felt deliberate and accidental at the same time. I did not pull away. That single moment broke something open inside me. Desire rushed in, hot and undeniable, colliding with fear and guilt until I could not tell them apart. I remember thinking that I could still stop. I remember telling myself that one drink did not define me. I remember the quiet voice in my head begging me to leave. I ignored it. We left together, the night air cool against my flushed skin. In the car, the silence pressed in, thick with unspoken intention. When he reached for me, his touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he understood the gravity of what we were about to do. The kiss was not frantic. It was slow, deliberate, devastating. It felt like stepping into warm water after years of cold. My body responded before my mind could catch up. Every doubt, every rule, every promise I had made to myself dissolved under the weight of being wanted. I betrayed my marriage that night, not in a rush of lust, but in a moment of surrender. Afterward, reality returned with brutal clarity. The rush faded, replaced by a hollow ache that settled deep in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, counting breaths, trying to understand how something that felt so alive could leave me feeling so empty. Evan slept beside me, his presence grounding and unsettling all at once. I felt tenderness toward him, mixed with regret so sharp it stole my breath. I had crossed a line that could not be erased. Driving home before dawn, I rehearsed lies I hoped I would never need. I washed my hands until my skin felt raw. I stood under the shower letting the water scald me, as if heat could burn away what I had done. Daniel called later that morning to say his meeting had gone well. His voice was warm, familiar, trusting. I answered him with practiced normalcy, each word a small act of betrayal. When the call ended, I broke down on the kitchen floor, the weight of my choices pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. I told myself it would be the last time, that it had been a mistake born of loneliness and poor judgment. I promised myself distance again, this time with more urgency. But secrets do not shrink when you hide them. They grow teeth. Evan and I fell into a dangerous rhythm.
Stolen moments.
Careful planning. Texts that carried just enough affection to keep the fire alive without exposing us. I lived in constant fear of being discovered, jumping at every unexpected sound, every question that lingered too long. Daniel noticed the changes. My phone always face down. My sudden attention to my appearance. The way I seemed present and absent at the same time. He did not accuse me, but his eyes followed me more closely now, searching. The tension at home became unbearable. I snapped over small things. I cried without warning. I avoided intimacy, terrified that closeness would unravel me completely. The twist came when I least expected it. One evening, as I reached for my phone, a message popped up from Evan at the exact moment Daniel walked into the room. I moved too quickly. Too obviously. Daniel said nothing, but the silence that followed was heavy and watchful. Later that night, I realized my mistake was larger than that moment. Daniel had always been observant. He had begun to connect dots I assumed were invisible. The safety I believed I still had was an illusion. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing, knowing that the truth was circling closer. I had wanted to feel alive again, to feel chosen, to feel something real. Instead, I had built a fragile world out of lies. and it was already starting to crack. The truth did not explode into my life. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like a wound being reopened layer by layer. By the time Daniel finally confronted me, the damage had already been done. He did not need proof anymore. He needed honesty. He asked me to sit across from him at the kitchen table late one evening, the same table where we had shared years of meals, laughter, and quiet routines. The light above us felt harsh, exposing everything I had worked so hard to hide. His eyes were tired, not angry, and that frightened me more than shouting ever could. He told me he felt me slipping away long before he suspected infidelity. He spoke about the silence between us, the way I seemed distant even when I was physically present. He said that trust does not usually shatter in one moment. It erodes when something feels wrong for too long. Then he asked me if there was someone else. I felt my chest tighten, my breath turning shallow. I could have lied again. I could have minimized it, but I was too worn down to pretend. The weight of my choices pressed against me, demanding release. I told him everything. Not dramatically, not defensively. I told him plainly, because lies had already cost me enough. I watched the man I loved absorb my confession in silence. His face drained of color. His jaw clenched. His hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the table. I realized then that betrayal is not just about broken vows. It is about breaking someone's sense of safety. He did not raise his voice.
He did not insult me.
He asked me to leave for a while because he needed space to think without falling apart. I packed a bag that night, my movements slow and mechanical, as if I were watching myself from a distance. The hotel room I stayed in felt sterile and unforgiving. Every sound echoed. Every thought grew louder. Without Daniel there, without the distraction of routine, I had nothing to shield me from the reality of what I had done. I ended things with Evan completely, not out of obligation, but out of clarity. Whatever I thought I had found with him dissolved under the weight of consequence. I was left alone with myself. The days stretched into weeks. Daniel and I communicated only when necessary. When he finally agreed to meet, it was in a public place, neutral ground. We sat across from each other like strangers, careful and guarded. He told me that he had considered ending the marriage. That part of him still believed walking away might be the only way to heal. He also told me that another part of him could not let go, no matter how hard he tried. Love, he said, does not disappear just because it is wounded. That was the moment I understood something important. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is courage. We began counseling soon after. Those sessions stripped us bare. There were no shortcuts. I listened as Daniel spoke about his pain, his humiliation, and the fear that he would never fully trust me again. I did not interrupt. I did not justify. I learned how to hold accountability without collapsing under it. Rebuilding trust demanded more than apologies. It required consistency, transparency, patience. I offered access to every part of my life without resentment, not because I was being monitored, but because I wanted him to feel safe again.
There were setbacks.
Days when Daniel pulled away emotionally. Nights when memories resurfaced and reopened wounds. I learned that healing does not move in straight lines. I learned to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. I also confronted my own emptiness. Therapy forced me to face the truth that I had been seeking validation instead of connection. I had confused attention with love. I had avoided difficult conversations until silence became dangerous. Slowly, we began to reconnect. Not as the people we once were, but as two individuals learning each other again. We talked more deeply than we ever had before. About fear. About expectations. About the ways we both failed to protect the marriage. Intimacy returned cautiously. It was tender, uncertain, but honest. Every touch felt deliberate, earned through effort and vulnerability. Love no longer felt automatic. It felt intentional. One evening, months later, Daniel told me he was choosing to stay. Not because the pain was gone, but because he believed in the possibility of something stronger. That choice did not erase the past. It honored the future. I realized then that love is not proven by perfection. It is proven by endurance. I almost gave up forever. I almost destroyed a bond that deserved protection. But love refused to let go, even when I gave it every reason to. This story is not about excusing betrayal. It is about accountability, growth, and the quiet, difficult work of rebuilding. It is about choosing honesty over comfort and commitment over escape. And it is about learning that sometimes the truest form of love is staying, facing the damage, and choosing each other again with open eyes and humbled hearts.